Good morning, everyone. Uh, I think it's 11 o'clock and we are going to start the session now. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the webinar series 2.0 by Isola Maharashtra chapter. For this session, we have actually had the help from Stone Studio, and Mr. Manoj Shah is here. Uh, if you some of you have also been with us on our first journey, that is the webinar 1.0 series that we had conducted, and the idea of that series was to take some inspiration and motivation from three eminent personalities who are based in Pune, and taking that inspiration forward, we have sort of now decided to go on a journey to the different regional landscapes of Maharashtra. And on this journey, when while brainstorming the idea, the thing that came to our mind was that what can be that one common thread between those different places that we are thinking of exploring. And one such common thread we found was the river Godavari, which has so much cultural importance in Maharashtra, and it meanders through varied landscapes of our region. And on this course of Godavari, the first city that we have chosen is at its mouth. That is, of course, it originates at Trimbakeshwar, but then we are going to explore the city on it, that is Nashik. So a little bit about Nashik. Like obviously everybody knows it, like the wine capital of Maharashtra. Is it like that? It's because of its the geographical location of that place, which is at the edge of the Deccan Plateau, which permits it to have amazing winters. Also, it has a cultural significance because of the river that the Kumbh Mela is conducted every 12 years, which is conducted at different places, also happens in Nashik. And from one of this city, we have a very like eminent landscape architect, that is Ritu Sharma, who is going to be the moderator for this session. So a little bit about Ritu. Ritu has been in Nashik, sorry, she's been in professional experience from about 15 years, and she is actively involved in academics and publications for more than a decade, with notable research papers and several stories through national magazines and journals. Conceptualized and edited 5 books till date. So I would like to welcome Ritu to the session, and I would like to hand over the other thing to her. So I think we'll just continue with our session. A big thank you to Mr. Manoj Shah for trusting in us and extending the help. Ritu, you can start the session.
Very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would thank Isola for creating this opportunity and then generating this idea. Second, thanks to my friend Zoe Pethe, who really, with all the situations and all the limitations that she had at her health front, but still she managed to come today for this session. And also, it is really encouraging to see your participation, that all your response, that you are so eager to actually know about this region. And I guess I'll be able to do justice to as a storyteller for today. So consider me as a storyteller only, because my job today is to actually introduce to a different or introduce to the way one would like to know Nashik as. So it is not about probably explaining the entire region or talking about the complete geography. It is also not about probably getting into the mythological narratives, but probably trying to just look at a method through which one can look at these landscapes. So the entire story moves around the idea of mythscapes and ecoscapes. So there is some kind of hypothesis that I'm borrowing here before maybe orienting the story in one hypothesis way, that mythological stories are something through which one can actually read these landscapes of Nashik. Because if you go through any kind of a geographical setting, and there would be some or the other stories through which you are associated to that, or rather that story is taking you towards that geography. It is kind of a treasure hunt, that you get a clue to go, and when once you reach to that place and there are some kind of wonders, and then you the entire land just becomes magical, and you can feel the vibrancy in the entire space. We are definitely not focusing on the mythological characters, and we are not even planning to relate them to that particular geography. The whole idea is just taking this storyboard as only a map through which we could access to these particular geographies. So, saying that, I think I have four stories today to tell you. Like Nashik, if I consider that to be a big narrative, like something like Ramayana and Mahabharata, you have a Mahakavya, and then you have lot of stories inside it. So, if we consider that Nashik is a big narrative, and it is a magical narrative that the way you want to see the stories, they will come to you. So this is the way probably I could gather some of the stories with whatever time that I have been here and whatever things that I have been experiencing in this place. So some of the stories are just the, but again, I would say that they are only the clues through which one can really access those geographical wonders in this region. So let's get on to the first story, the main intention or the main element of the geography, which is the origin of the river. And one could really wonder that how do somebody know that these are the few drops of waters, and we call this as Godavari. And where do we find these drops of water? How does this whole uh, thing, which is so hidden and is completely cryptic, and it is just like a mystic place, and somehow it just turns out to be the huge river, which further we know the story in the sense. But in the origin, it is really an interesting tale that one could go about. That there are these interesting ideas through which various people have narrated the story. They would call it Gautami because people should remember the name of Gautam Rishi. And if you can ask that how people would know that this particular mountain is only to be called as Brahmagiri, or this is the particular water which now will become a river later on and all, and people just knows it probably through different expressions. So one of the story now in front of you is a painting by Raja Ravi Verma about the story of how Gautam Rishi and then how this Godavari comes into picture. And then one of the paintings in front of you is from a religious scripture. So maybe any walk of life, from an artistic perspective or from a religious perspective, but the message is definitely being conveyed. Uh, and somehow in the entire regional landscape, some geography stands out. And this entire setup, one could really wonder that why this particular hill would be called as Brahmagiri, and how those few drops of water somewhere in some crevices now will turn out to be a river in the later stage. One really wonder about the magical power the landscape really has, the way it changes through the entire region, and the kind of experiential value it all has. And there are few also sub chapters into these stories through which you are guided through. So the first chapter will now tell you that Shiva and those Jata, and from the Jata the Ganga would come, and they actually name it as Jata Mandir. And in this entire huge geography, there is this tiny spot which is called Jata Mandir, where the first emergence of the river is believed to be. Then second name, they would call it as Ganga Dwar. So the name itself can tell you that that is the place probably the first appearance of Ganga could be. And this is the small thing, and in the entire such big scarp of Ganga Dwar, there would these tiny drops which would start coming in. Ultimately, the river is still not flowing because it is on the hill, and in the Trambak town, when it starts appearing, it is through different tanks and kunds. And every kund and tank also will have its own story, the logic of its location, whether it is a natural spring, it is the terminology themselves will tell us that whether it's a talao or a spring, or it's a collection, or it's a natural water source, and things like that. So sacred bathing will also become an important element into the whole story. And then they will start marking this sacred bathing into different rituals and different ideas would be associated to it. So some rituals will be limited to some tirth and some rituals will not be happening at that particular tirth. Some of the Marathi Sanskrit also will tell you something about geography. Like this particular Marathi phase would tell us that how the entire Brahmagiri will make an enclosure all around the place, and how this Ahilya and Godavari Sangam will become an important point to locate this Jyotirlinga, which is another identity part of the geography. Going to the second level, that this was all about how Godavari appears in Trambak. So one important thing, again, we come back to the place of Nashik, and we enter subtly, again, the Godavari, the way Godavari flows, we enter subtly to the another associated story of the Kumbh Mela. Why does it appear at only that location? And then Kumbh again takes you to another geographical marvel, and that is how one could refer to this geography. So what is so important about only this much patch? Why at all the city would have arrived only around, or how do people would know that all the temples and overlays and things would happen into only this area? So the geography is little interesting in this situation, that the river which is flowing in one direction will take a very peculiar bend. And with this kind of geography, only that much of patch is something which was filled of several tanks and several kunds, and somehow it gets its religious importance. And the point where it takes that turn becomes the sacred point of Kumbh Mela. And that's how the entire story starts happening. But this is the layer where, this is the region where there are so many layers. Like there is one proto-historic site, or one could refer to. So the human habitation is much earlier available in this region, can be seen through, and this area is called Matichi Gadi in the local terms. And this is also identified as one of the significant archaeological site. So at one end of this stretch, there is this Ram Kund, or the venue of Kumbh Mela. And on the other end of the stretch is this Matichi Gadi, which is the archaeological site. And then there would be so much of celebration happening through all the eras and generations, all the rulers and the people who would be associated to the landscape would try and make their footprint into this entire thing. And then soon the entire settlement would start revolving all its life around the water, and just this river becomes such a big point of celebration for everyone. Like people, not only for Kumbh Mela being the one of the important festival around this river, but then everyday activity, the daily bathing and all the rituals and entire settlement will now start revolving around the sacred water. And they will just maintain the entire aura, and they would still become the carrier of this story further. So the small patch of geography now becomes such an interesting thing to happen, and that gives us an access to our third story, and there enters our third character. So the name of the region is Ramkund, and that's how our third character comes into picture in the form of sacred footprint. And again, as we all are familiar with the story of what kind of events actually happened in the life of these characters, and one could actually relate some more interesting stuff. Here, one highlighting point is also that looking at the terminologies, like once we could look at Panchavati. So the names themselves are also indicating to a lot of geographical characters. So time ephemeral, the plants and the trees and the one and the vati, the things they are explaining are somehow been transformed. But the geological processes are somehow there as a clue to tell us the story about how they would have lived into the area. So Sita Gufa and Panchavati is again, Gufa again indicates some kind of an interesting geological formation. And they would tell us the story that how Ram was actually staying in this area, and how this somehow the indication of there could have been deer in this. And then about Also, one could see some through some paintings that they describe a lot of flora and fauna and what all activities or what all events could have happened into this region. And though the original landscape and the character would have been lost, but still the interesting geological feature of a very unique type of gufa at a very different scale, and which keep you wondering and thinking about that why probably this would have happened into this. Though there are a lot of interesting debate about that, what do you actually mean by vati? Vati is a word or it is a type of forest. So probably we would just deliberate on these kind of ideas some other time. And then within the same region, you also have another incidents happening. Now, in the same area, this city would also borrow its name from. The first idea was Navashikha, so that's why it is also called Nashik. So Navashikha was about the 9 mounts on which the or around which the city was placed. And another story is in I guess in front of our screen that we know that Lakshman and Shurpanakha and things. So that's how probably it borrows its name. And then we could just explore these stories. But what is more interesting is again the terminology of tapovan. So again we have a word called one here, so which talks about what kind of setting it would have been. And some interesting geological features again, one could see this again being another Sangam of Kapila River and Godavari River. And again, that becomes another interesting avenue to look at this story. Other than that, there were some more parallel things happening, as one could understand that even Buddhist ecology was one thing which was also happening in the region. And there is one footprint which gives a very interesting access to how probably the site was being chosen, and the idea about the trade routes and why particular. And there are a lot of stone inscriptions into this zone. And again, these caves are known by the geographical feature they are in, and this area is called Trirashmi Hill. So these are also called as Trirashmi Caves, and that's how one can actually access to another idea of ecology and the stories. Another important layer was about the footprints of Jainism in the region, and we still have some significant sites to mark their presence. One is the Anjaneri group of temples, then Gajapant Hill, and again Mangitungi Hill. So all of them will have again some interesting avenues, and they just serve as a very good access to understand these stories and how ecologies and stories were related to in the storytelling or the message spreading, as what we could say. So now what makes us think about this whole theme? So I was just trying to narrate some of the stories, and what is also happening in the region is this, that sometime in the current transformations, there is one place called Nandur Madhyameshwar, and some point of time a dam was built there. So with the dam wall, the entire backwaters and the river course now had uh, a different form altogether. And around 15 to 16 kilometers earlier to this dam wall, there is one place called Sandori. And the entire ghats were submerged because now the water volume was more. Now the water was actually staying there for the entire year. And this really keeps us thinking that if the stories are getting irrelevant and the clues are actually getting submerged, then what is the new way to relate to ecology? So the other idea, what is happening around this place is that there is a bird sanctuary. So a new ecological layer, or maybe there is one more interesting ecological layer which is thriving onto. But then we really question that ecologists themselves are becoming, or maybe they are a very rare species. So with the kind of scientific knowledge we are looking at, or maybe the kind of connection, if we look at the population is the one which is settling into this region, don't we think that we need to have new stories and new storytellers and somehow try and take these clues and dig into the stories and what do they want to say? So this whole idea of the entire approach is only to highlight that can storytelling or the stories becomes one of the ways. The stories could be something maybe plotted into the real geography, whether they are myths or they are real. We are probably not looking at getting into that kind of an argument, but they definitely can become an interesting access to view this geography or to see them around and then try and interpret what they are trying to say. And why they become, I guess, more important because they don't have those boundaries of or they don't give you a burden of knowledge and things, and they just become way of life, and you simply know that this is Brahmagiri, and that is how one simple parikrama around Brahmagiri can tell you that this is ecological sensitive zone, and that defines some of the ecological boundaries for us. Maybe some terminologies like Panchavati will give you some mystic or some kind of clues to what kind of forest would have been into this area, and then you it gives you an opportunity to question of what kind of geography that we are in and why these stories would have been placed or why these stories are getting the use or the getting the advantage of having this kind of dramatic backdrops. And there could be, I'm sure, once we all could see them, there would be several stories that if, with every person there could be different perspectives to look at them. But I guess this could become one of the interesting way to look at the landscapes, and that's what probably I have to say about it. And with this, I'm really happy to introduce the speaker of today, and she will take over this idea further. So, if at all you have some more, if you want to know more about the river and the regional geography and about the trees and plants, I guess you can have those questions in your mind. And we have a session today and also the session on the next Sunday. So these are the two sessions through which we are trying to explore, maybe through the medium of some of the stories. These speakers will zoom down some of the mythscapes and the geological relationships they will try to highlight, and that is how we can actually see and keep thinking about all our things. And then at the end of the, or probably once we have heard our first speaker, we could actually have an interaction round on both the ideas, what the idea that I was just talking about and probably the idea that Zui would also talk about. Zoe is a, first of all, she is a very passionate person, she is very sensitive by heart, and she is doing an enormous work into this region. She is the one who has actually been traveling through. So she's actually moving through every place and try and investigate almost a single plant from a small sapling to understanding the entire ecosystem. So her, and she's also been working on to several projects of documentation. She does habitat survey for people, and more than that, she works for herself. Is something what I want to really highlight, that she is particularly curious and and a true investigator at her heart, and her concerns are beyond an activist. So that's, I guess, with more than her formal education and her work field, her temperaments and her attitude is what is something to be appreciated about. And I'm so thankful to her that she actually is going through this COVID situation, is not dealing well with her at her family front, but out of all that she could make this day. And I'm really thankful for Zui to agreeing to make this narrative today. So I think I'll hand over to Zui.
Yes, thank you so much, Isola and Ritu. And it's after a few days of tension, it's really good to be back and talking about what you really love to do. So thank you for giving me a chance. As Ritu said, I think it is the perfect way to look at a certain place where you can merge the culture with the nature, the biodiversity, the ecology of a certain place. That could be the most holistic approach where people and the other life around it can be connected. So today I am here to
basically zoom in a bit, as Ritu said, and talk about a specific site which was referred by Ritu also in her presentation, and that is the Anjaneri hill. Today we'll be talking about Anjaneri as a biocultural heritage, that is a place where people, communities, and the biodiversity, all of these things come together and make a very important landmark situation. So we'll be talking about these aspects of the Anjaneri Hill. Very rapidly, we'll go through the mythology and the anthropological part of Anjaneri and its background. As we know, the Anjaneri, the name suggests that Anjaneri is an abode of goddess Anjani, who is known as the mother of Lord Hanuman. And this is the same place, it's believed to be the birthplace of Hanuman as well. We find a couple of temples dedicated to the goddess and her son on the two plateaus. There are pilgrims visiting this place on and off throughout the year, but there is a huge yatra which takes place on Hanuman Jayanti, and there are around a lakh of people visiting from throughout the district for this yatra. So it's a very big event which takes place on this hill, connecting lots of people and lots of villages to this hill. As Ritu mentioned, Anjaneri also has a connection with the Jain history, and it's believed, the Jain community believes that there are around 100 plus places of worship, caves for meditation, and places and hostels for monks to stay in and around the Anjaneri Hill. These are some glimpses of this, of the type of structures which are present in the Jain context. There are also contemporary Hindu temples in and around Anjaneri. Here we can see Vishnu in his Nrsimha avatar, which is depicted on one of the temples. Besides this, Anjaneri is a very important site from the local community's point of view. And other than being places of worship and religious importance, Anjaneri provides a very big and very crucial livelihood support to the local communities. The most important part is about rainfall, that is harvesting the rains. Anjaneri is a huge hill which rises to around 1300 meters above the sea level. So it blocks the clouds, and there is a huge precipitation in the catchment, which is around 2,500 to 3,000 millimeters annually. The place is well known for its rice production. So this huge precipitation is the major cause why rice and such good quality of rice can be produced in this area. Besides, this hill is a tabletop. It's a plateau on its top. So which is why the rain which falls, the speed of the runoff is reduced. The forests below, the vegetation below further reduces the speed of the runoff, increasing the percolation of water, the recharge of groundwater which takes place. And it also feeds a percolation tank which lies below the Anjaneri. So water, groundwater and agricultural water wise, drinking water wise, Anjaneri is a very important asset to the local communities. The hill of Anjaneri is a home to a huge biodiversity, which we will be discussing later on. But this biodiversity provides a lot of medicinal plants, edible species to the local people, and thus providing them with food and nutritional security. Many of these plants like Hirida, Beheda, Aula, wild turmeric, which is called as ran halad locally, all these species are harvested and sold by the local communities. And so the hill also supports income generating activities for this community. Besides, Anjaneri has two very extensive plateaus which have a lot of grass growing. All this grass provides fodder security to the local cattle which exists in the area. Besides all these things, Anjaneri and Anjaneri forest is a home and a refuge to a lot of insects. And I'm sure we all have a question in mind, like what is the role of insects? Why are they supporting the communities? So Anjaneri and the surrounding area is basically dominated by farming communities. We all know that the food crops which we eat, almost 80 to 85% of these food crops are open pollinated. They need insect pollinating agents to produce food from these plants. Anjaneri is a place which provides refuge for all such kinds of insects in the season when there is drought and not much food is available. So Anjaneri has a very important role to play with regards to local livelihoods and also with regards to nutrition and well-being of the entire local community. Now let us have a look at the ecological part and the ecological significance of this area. This is a map which shows us the Western Ghats or the Sahyadri ranges, which begin from the Dangs in Gujarat and extend right up to Kerala in the south. These hills, they run north-south, obstruct the northwest monsoon winds, and are responsible for a very typical and unique monsoon in India. These hills are also a home to a huge diversity of organisms, may it be plants, animals, amphibians, microbes, etc. With this importance with regards to the living diversity or the geographical importance, this area has been attributed as a global biodiversity hotspot. So the Western Ghats are a global biodiversity hotspot, and Anjaneri is a part of the northernmost tip of the Western Ghats. So naturally, biodiversity wise and from the view of entire ecology, Anjaneri is also a very important, actually representing the different kinds of habitats which are seen on Anjaneri. So every kind of habitat which you see, there are cliffs, there are steep slopes, there are forests, there is a water body, there are plateaus. All these kind of habitats have a very typical characteristics with regards to rainfall, moisture availability, wind speed, sun exposure, temperature of the substrates, temperature gradient which takes place in during the day or during the seasons. All these things vary in each of these habitats, which is why very specific organisms can thrive in specific kind of habitats. Naturally, more the number of habitats, more is the diversity in a certain place. Anjaneri, being a very huge and extensive hill, it houses numerous kind of habitats, and obviously it is a home to a huge biodiversity as well. Amongst these different habitats, today I would like to focus on a few selected habitats which are very nutrient deficit, and therefore they are home to very unique kind of species. So we talk majorly about the largest component of Anjaneri, which are the high elevation rocky plateaus in the beginning. So as you can see, the Anjaneri hilltop is a very extensive plateau, and you can see that there is hardly any tree vegetation growing around, a lot of bare rock with a very scanty kind of soil cover. So this is a very typical characteristic of uh, plateaus, especially on the hills. If we focus on the northern parts of Western Ghats, we can see two kinds of plateaus which exist here. One is the lateritic plateau, which can be seen from Mahabaleshwar below, that is towards the south, while there is basaltic plateau, which you can see in these northern extents of the Western Ghats. So today we'll be talking about Anjaneri, which is also a type of basaltic plateau. As I said earlier, rocky plateaus, they are like a soilless or very less soiled habitats. This nature, they have very limited moisture availability. Naturally, they have limited nutrition, especially in the months of monsoon, when there are torrential rains in this area. The plateaus, they have completely saturated substrates, which is like maybe 100% saturation, because the drainage is poor. There is a solid rock below, the drainage is poor, and the substrate is saturated with water. But once the rains end, immediately the substrate begins to dry, and from come November, the entire area becomes very dry and void of humidity. So because the area is devoid of soil or has very less soil, there is poor drainage because of the rocky substrate which lies below. The nutrition availability is low. The moisture availability is for a very limited kind of duration in the year. But whenever there is monsoon, the moisture availability is near saturation. So these very typical characters of the rocky plateau have enabled a typical kind of flora to flourish in these areas. I don't know whether I'm visible. My cursor is visible. I am pointing towards a pink flowered plant.
Yes, your cursor is visible. Yes.
So that plant is a very typical example for a plant of a rocky plateau. Basically, with limited nutrition, plants need to find alternative sources of nutrition for their growth. This is a very typical adaptation which occurs in the plants of the rocky plateau, where these plants get their nutrition from alternative sources, like the plant which is seen here. It is called the Drosera indica. Drosera indica is a plant which doesn't grow leaves. Instead, it has very sticky tentacles. When an insect is attracted towards the brightly colored flower, the insect gets stuck using these sticky tentacles, and the plant extracts nutrition by squeezing this insect. So this is a kind of insectivorous plant, and this is an alternative nutrition source which the plant has adapted to. Another plant, the picture of which is shown just above, Drosera, is Utricularia. This is a Utricularia species, which is another insectivorous plant. It is also called as bladderwort as a common English name. This plant has bag-like structures on its roots. They're very small, minute bag-like structures, and microscopic insects which are flowing in the water below get caught in these bags. Once the insect is caught in the bag, the lid of the bag, which is very sensitive to touch, closes, and the entire insect body is dissolved in the juice which is filled in this bag. So these are a few examples of insectivorous plants and alternative nutrition which you get to see on plateaus. Besides, there is one grass species which is visible. There is hardly any soil which can be seen below. It is almost growing on a rock. So this species is called as Trypogon species. It is a type of grass, and it shows a very typical kind of character or adaptation for these harsh climates. The adaptation is called as poicohydry. That is, it is a desiccation resistant plant. When very harsh conditions and very low moisture levels are reached in these habitats, the plant dries off completely, entering into dormancy. But with the coming of next monsoon, these plants simply rejuvenate those cells, those dormant cells, and again begin their growth. This is a very unique character of this grass species, which is called as Trypogon, and it is visible on rocky plateaus and also on the cliffs, which we'll be seeing later. Another adaptation which we can see is an adaptation which is in correspondence to the poor drainage which is found in these areas. The plant on the left side of the screen below with white ball-like flowers are called as eriocolons. Eriocolons, even though they are looking like grasses, they are not grasses, they are flowering plants. They are dicot plants, and these plants are resistant to drainage. So they can grow really well and profusely multiply in poor drained soils, even at places where there is complete hydration of soil. So these are some species which grow. Then the one plant which is shown on the left top is a wild turmeric species, which stores additional food in its tubers, and with the arrival of first rains, it produces flowers and grows into a plant so that it can complete its life cycle in a very short span before moisture has been lost from their growth substrates. One more adaptation which we come to see in such areas is what we call as ephemeral flushes. That is, lot of plants flowering at a single time in a certain habitat. So what the picture in the center, the lilac colored flowers which are visible, this is basically called as Topley carvi or Pleocolus ritchii. This is a kind of plant which flowers every 11 years, once in every 11 years. And whenever they flower at a single time so as to attract a maximum number of pollinators in a very short span of time, because they flower hardly for 1 or 2 weeks, once in 11 years. So to increase their chances of seed production and propagation, they have adopted this strategy, and thus they increase their chances of survival in such difficult habitats. Now I would just like to walk you through some important species which you see on Anjaneri Hill, which are unique because they are endemic. That is, they are only found in the Western Ghats or the Sahyadri ranges. I would like to name some of them. The left top is Paracarium malabaricum. The right top is Pinda cocanensis. The right bottom is Carvia calosa. And the left bottom is Euphorbia fusiformis. There are two in the top. There are two orchid species which can be seen. One is Habenaria heniana and other is Habenaria punchganensis. Both of these species are very early flowering species. They are tuberous and they are critically endangered species which are found on Anjaneri Hill. The one image at the bottom is another very specific image of a tuberous herb which is called as Ceropegia anjanerica. As the name says, anjanerica, this plant is basically endemic and restricted to the Anjaneri Hills only. That is, in the places in and around Anjaneri is the only place in the world where you can find the species. So, conservation and taking care of all this area is of crucial importance if we have to protect the species and avoid this species from getting extinct. There are a lot many taxa which still need to be studied and worked upon. A lot of amphibian species, fungi, a lot of spiders, scorpions. They have hardly been studied on the hill, but these pictures are just to depict the kind of diversity and the biological importance of this place. Now let us go to the next habitat, another habitat which has a nutrient crunch, and that is the cliffs. So these cliffs are the places where you find the caves, especially the Jain caves in this area. As you can see, the picture on the top is a vertical escarpment or a vertical cliff of Anjaneri, which is very huge. And still you can see clumps of grasses establishing themselves and growing very well. So these grasses are again the Trypogon species, which we discussed earlier in the plateau adaptations. So this is the Trypogon species, and then there is a species of cypress, which also grows on such cliffs. These are the diverse and colorful plants which you can see growing along the cliffs. Most of these are endemic to the Western Ghats, that is, they are only found in the Western Ghats, and some of them are also critically endangered, that is, they are on the brinks of their extinction, and if something is not done to conserve them henceforth, these species will be extinct in a short while. Another very important role of these cliffs of Anjaneri is with regards to the long-billed vultures. I'll just talk a little bit about vultures. We all know that vultures are a very important part of our food chain. They are the sanitizers of nature. They are the, since we have become very fond of this word sanitizer, I'm using it. These are the cleaning agents. These are the birds which clean the dead carcasses and avoid spread of lot of diseases and really bad smell in the surrounding area. So long-billed vultures are a very important part of the food chain. And in the last 20 years, there has been a very drastic reduction in the numbers of these vultures. In the peninsular India, you find three major types of vultures. Two of them are residents, while one is a migratory bird. The two resident vultures are called, one is called as the long-billed vulture and the other is called as a white-backed vulture. The third migratory vulture is the Egyptian vulture, which migrates from the African continent to India during some part of the year. So long-billed vultures nest in the very tall vertical cliffs of hills. Anjaneri is the only place in Nashik district, in spite of the fact that Nashik has a lot of good cliffed forts and hills around. Still, Anjaneri is the only place where you get to see vulture nestings in such huge numbers. Anjaneri, the vultures nesting on Anjaneri have been monitored for the past around 20-25 years, and it's found that in spite of the vulture numbers being reducing very drastically throughout the nation, the nesting numbers on Anjaneri have not been reduced. In fact, they have stayed very steady throughout this tenure. This is a very important facet of biodiversity of Anjaneri and why this place has to be conserved. Besides this, the cliff is also a home to very unique kind of reptiles. In the left corner, you see a gecko. In Marathi, we call it a pal, which is very typical habitant of cliffs, and it lives in the cracks of different cliffs. It is called as Hemidactylus arranbowri. This species was recently described in near Kas, and later on we also found it to be existing on Anjaneri Hill. More studies need to be done in this regards. So these are very typical, unique kind of organisms which grow in association with these nutrient deficit and very harsh kind of habitats. Another habitat which we see, which is always nutrient deficit, and not many trees can grow around, are the very steep slopes. These steep slopes are generally occupied by either very typical grass species, or they are occupied by carvi, that is Strobilanthes species, which also characteristically grows in areas where trees do not grow. Below these carvi or Strobilanthes, there are interesting orchid species which grow. The one on the left is called as Habenaria crassifolia, while the one on the right is called Habenaria digitata. These are two tuberous species which grow here. Besides, the right-hand top flower is of Striga gesneroides. This is a parasitic species which grows on the roots of different plants and gets an alternative nutrition from these plants. It also has chlorophyll through which it produces food of itself. Then there are two species again of the tuberous Ceropegia which grow on the carvi basically. This is Ceropegia media and this is Ceropegia oculata. Then there is an edible species of a tuberous climber which is called as Dioscorea pentaphylla. You can see the flowering initiated there, and this is the flowering which we generally eat during Rushi Panchami, which just recently happened, and we make the Rushi chi bhaji, which has this as a component, and it's a lot of more. We call it Chaicha more in Nashik, and it comes for sale from these places in Nashik market. There are a lot of insects and butterflies, mushrooms, which also reside in association with these plants, very typical of these high steep slopes. Through this entire presentation, what I want to communicate is that a prosperous biodiversity can actually support a community and make it very prosperous. Through our culture, there have been many places where such provisions, where people can be motivated to conserve the biodiversity surrounding them, to protect it in different forms, can be seen. May it be a concept like Sacred Grove or a Devrai, where people conserve an entire forest in the name of God. May it be a worship of keystone species like the banyan tree or the peepal tree, the umber tree. All these species, they are very important because they produce fruits in off seasons, and they provide food for a lot of birds and animal species. They are a very good nesting site for many birds and animals. All these characters make the ficus family a major keystone species in the local biodiversity. So, as you know, we all worship many of the species from the ficus family in our culture. Besides, just like Ritu mentioned, we worship different natural elements in different forms, be it river, be it a hill, be it a forest, be it a tree. So all these traditions basically motivate local people to acknowledge the importance of biodiversity in this area, and I think there is uh, a lot of connection in between biodiversity and a cultural importance of a certain place. Anjaneri is can be a classical example for such a kind of debate. I think the traditions and the temples and the different yatras which are held here are a way in which the local community has been connected with the hill, so that they visit the hill often, see the changes happening there, worry for it, take steps to protect it, and make this biodiversity even more prosperous. So with this message, I think I will stop and we can have a discussion on this. Thank you.
This was a great glimpse of what we can see about Nashik as a whole and Anjaneri. Let me open the forum for question and answers now. Should I ask Urmila ma'am to unmute herself and ask question to Zoe?
Actually, Jui answered my question later on in the presentation when she mentioned that Anjaneri was part of the northwestern basaltic rocks.
Yeah.
So that was the question. That was the question that I had asked.
Okay.
And I'd really like to thank you for the presentation today, especially when, as Ritu mentioned, there have been cases of corona and not being well and things at home. Jui, thank you so much for having made it today.
Urmila ji, it's always a pleasure, and I'm thanks because actually I just got a very nice change from all these things.
Thank you.
Zoe, I would have just one question also to the, because there are so many questions that my mind has always been cluttered with when I look at all this region. And since I also want to tell the audience that Zoe is working with us in documenting the natural heritage of the entire district. So she is the only one we are dependent on. Nobody of us is really equipped to do so. And she is also been working with us into especially those who are the students here and the other professionals into landscape architecture, that we also are getting the habitat mapping done for certain bigger sites, so that we are trying to be more sensitive towards it. So these are some of the ways the professionals are getting connected. But what do you think could be the way now people are getting the religion to be a little irrelevant kind of stories? So what do you think could be the way that we could involve people's attention again, but not from a tourist or from a resource grabber point of view, but a very sensitive caretaker point of view? So anything that you have in your mind?
What I feel is that, as you say, religion is becoming quite an outdated, maybe irrelevant sort of a concept. But I think two kind of outlooks can help us in dealing with this sensitivity. And one is the citizen scientist kind of forum, where very locally people can go about, look at things, explore things, and then share their experiences and make it, begin to look at the biodiversity and things surrounding us. And the other is trying to look at all these things in the context of our traditions. and maybe connecting it with science is something which has always appealed to me, and maybe will be more appealing to the coming younger generation also, because it's time that we look at all these things in a more logical way instead of a ritualistic kind of view. So I think these two things, if we can be if we could motivate people to look at things around us, maybe it will be more useful.
Yes, this also gives me some more question that if we try and relate some of these stories, as you were trying to relate the story of Tapovan or Panchavati or things, do you recommend something to refer that, how authentic things would be? So does the Vati word means really the types of forest, or it is really the tree species that they are hinting at? So there could be so many questions once we try and look into the past data of such sites, and there the entire limitations goes into. So any reference that you would suggest where these things could be interpreted?
Mm, I think we need to get into more, uh, look at it in more detailed ecological way in all these, how these settings are, maybe then get some clues about this. More reading, more field work to be done in this sense also.
Yeah, Swati Prabhu, yeah, please ask your question.
Yes. Hi, Juhi ma'am. You were
Hi.
talking about the myth related to the Anjaneri Parvat, that the birthplace of Hanumana and the Mata Anjani. But the similar kind of story is related to the Hampi landscape also. So instead of looking at like that, can we conclude, like I have asked a question, that do this place have abundance of Anjani trees? Uh, uh, that might be another reason why this name has been come up to this place. Can we
Uh,
relate like that?
yeah, if we are looking at it from biodiversity point of view, you say that it is Anjani tree. Basically,
Yeah.
if you say go with the name, so these common names are very confusing many of the times. So there are two trees which are named as Anjan or Anjani. One is the Hardwickia binnata.
Yes.
Yeah, so Hardwickia binnata is typically a tree which grows in the dry lands where rainfall is not more than 300, 400 millimeters annually. It's a very good fodder tree, and it typically occupies that kind of grassland habitats mostly.
Okay.
So the place
Okay.
where we are currently talking about receives, as I said, around 2,500 millimeters of rainfall annually. So that is not a place where you find this Anjan,
Okay. Okay.
definitely.
Okay. Okay.
Another tree which has been described as Anjana Kanchana Karavandicha, where Maharashtra
Yeah.
has been
Yeah. Right.
described that way.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
Anjan is again a different type, which is a tree which is called as Memesilon, Memesilon
Okay.
umbelatum. So this species is found in the semi-evergreen forests, which you see in Nashik district, starting from Kalsubai and
Yeah.
that places. Unfortunately, currently these species are not found on Anjaneri.
Okay.
Memisalon
Okay.
is not there, but the associated species to Memisalon, may it be Olea, may it be mango, may it be syzygium, these species are
Okay.
still there. So it's
Okay.
possible that that is one reason why this name comes. What
Okay.
I feel is that why it should be Hanuman or it should be Anjani or whatever, I think it is the way people connect to it.
Yeah.
People
Right.
do not understand whether it is Hardwickia or it is Memisoilon. If you have to make it connect, you have to connect them to it with the most popular what entity, and that is maybe that is why you connect it with deities.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
I think I can ask Amruta Yadav.
My question is what kind of soil was present and what were the problems when you faced?
Okay. So as I said, this is all a basaltic kind of a plateau, and so the soil which is present in this area is basically acidic soils and slightly blackish brownish in nature. But typically when we are speaking about plateaus, the soil substrate or the soil layer on these plateaus is very scanty, very less, and more of bare rock which is exposed, and there are species which are growing on such bare rock and very less soil. Uh, about like problems is basically about involving community into all this initiative for protecting these areas and making them sensitive, since there is a lot of urbanization and people have lost their connect with their surrounding biodiversity. It is more important to connect with them, to motivate them, and to again make them remember all these connections which they had once.
I think my question was that time on a slide where she mentioned quite a few botanical names. So of the yeah, on the plateau. So do these species have local common names, like tribal people knowing all of these?
In my experience, I can't hear the question.
It was about the. Can you hear?
Yeah, I just heard the first part, whether tribal people have names.
Okay, that was the end. But the botanical names that you mentioned of the very these rocky outcrop species, which come and stay for about 15 days or 2 months or span or whatever, for very less span in the year. So do they have local common names? Are they known to the people?
My observation is that all those species which have local uses, that is, the local communities, are using those species either as food, either as medicinal plant, either as harvesting them as NTFPs for sale. All those species which have some or other use have very specific names to them. But then there are some species, like if you know a species of Asteraceae, which is called as Bloomia. It is a weed, it grows anywhere. So there are a lot of species involved, and the genera is called as the Bloomia. So many people, they cannot differentiate at species level such kind of species which are not of much use. But whenever there is some species which has utility, they definitely have very specific names, very specific observations for how to identify these species. They also know how and when they should be harvested, and how they must be processed, and how they must be used.
Is Atreyi, right? Atreyi Ghosh.
Ma'am, so in a slide, you showed us some endemic species that are on the verge of their extinction, like they're getting endangered. So can you suggest any possible methods how we can conserve them?
The best possible method is protecting the habitats in which they grow. Since these plants are studied very less ecologically, we hardly know anything about them, their associations, their microbial associations, their fungal associations, which trees whose exudates are affecting their life cycle. There is hardly anything which we know about these species. So the best and the easiest thing which we can do is that conserve the places where they are growing and have least disturbance in such sites. But unfortunately, that is the most hardest thing.
Yes.
Find. Yeah.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Swati, you want to ask something or you want to say something?
Yeah, I just posted it in the chat box. You can. Okay, I'll just ask Ritu. I mean, Zui also, both of you, when you speak, it's like it's fabulous to listen to both of you. And Nashik is a region which is just rich. I mean, there's no like this can go on even if you tell for 2 hours, the time won't be sufficient. I know. I just want to ask one, maybe narrate, ask or request Ritu to ask that she has been visiting these places for many times because this kind of in-depth insight you get is not just with one site or two sites site visits. Same with I think Zui. So could you both of you elaborate how you get engaged with these spaces again and again, and then how that continuous engagement helps you in understanding? This is especially for the students when you want to do this kind of a lifelong study and consistent study. Then what are the key points that you could share with the students or the listeners?
Zoe, I think you can go on answering it first, and then I'll come to my part.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, what I think is that very short-term visits to a certain place are not sufficient when you need to get the actual need to grasp the actual essence of that place and how it is. And so repetitively going to the place, seeing it in different seasons, every time you go you find something new and you begin to explore to find why it is that way. So that is very important if you have to understand the place thoroughly. I've been working in Anjaneri since maybe past 8 years. But even now, when I go to Anjaneri, there are some things which I've never seen, never thought I could have seen in this place, and then I find them, and then I need to explore how come Anjaneri has a few more species which I had not seen earlier, and why are they here. So there is a lot of things when you go and visit a place multiple times. So any kind of intervention which you wish to do in a place, it should definitely come after a very rigorous and repetitive kind of studying that place, and studying not only actually in terms of visiting, but about reading, about referencing, about talking to people who have been there earlier, their experiences, their views about that place, their perspective. So all these things are very necessary if you have to do something which will benefit that place, those communities, and actually make a difference. So another point is about the communities. What I feel is that you can go to a place and see a place by your with your eyes, but if you have to actually appreciate a certain place completely, you will have to interact with the local communities who are definitely not going to talk to you the first time you go there. So you need to build rapport. They need to have confidence in you and about your intentions. So that after all these things only will they open up, and will you have good discussions about the issues which they are facing, and about the issues which the landscape in which you wish to work is facing. So without these repetitive kind of visits, it is not possible. And I think for that, what you need to do is you need to passionately feel uh, about that place, and you need to be very clear about whether you are ready to give that much amount of time and work that much in for that certain place. And once you are clear about that, I think it will not be that difficult. But you definitely need to give a lot of time and a lot of inputs, and also get emotionally involved in all these things.
Yes, Zoe has almost told half part of the story, that the passion is something which just takes you there. But more than that, there's a different perspective that I would present, because in a way, I'm not from Nashik. So I had been here for say 8 years. So 4 years before Pune, and now 4 years after I came back from Pune. So within this time, I guess the geographical variety and the kind of cultural associations people are carrying with this area is really interesting to study and really interesting to know about. So the more you go to the place, every time you get to see a few new things, and it's like the entire area is so rich that only for Trambak, if I'm studying that for 4 years, but still I go and I find ki, okay, there's some other layer which I have not seen. There's something still that which we don't know. So this cultural association with geography is something really magical about this region. I have no idea how people have developed this kind of a sensitive relationship with this entire setup, and it's so complex and dynamic that they still hold the value to the entire geography. I would say this the complete region is very magical, and that just keeps you bound. And I guess we have, I don't even know that I've already seen 5% of it or not. So that's what I think I can say about the place. And then more people like Zui, and then there are more speakers would come for the next session as well. So more you get to know about the place. I guess you go with a different insight also. So it's not just the place having a variety. It is also that you are also growing up in terms of your knowledge. And sometimes once you grow with a different insight, you want to go and actually check what is it that the site has to tell you, something which you have missed out probably in the last time. So I think that's what I can sum it up about.
Wow,
Thanks both of you. Amazing answers. Very nice. Thanks both of you.
Thank you, Ritu and Zui. It was such an insightful and great session. But since we are bound by time, I think I'll ask. First, I'll just check whether our donor, who have always been a great support to us, Mr. Manoj Shah, if he's there.
I'm very thankful to all of you to give me this opportunity, and I thank Isola and I thank Vikas Bosekar sir, Dhanashri madam, to give me this opportunity. I'll just introduce myself. I'm the CEO and founder of Stone Studio. I've done my formal training in gemology, that is science, study of science of natural stones. I'm very passionate about stones, and I'm very happy to be in this field. I'm working in this field since last 14 years. We do natural stone all over India. We work with artisans from the remotest part of India. I've been working with a lot of architects, landscape architects, designers all over India. And I'm very happy to see a lot of architects and landscape architects whom I'm working with. They are already in this group. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, Isola. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Manoj. Thank you so much. Bosekar sir, would you formally give the vote of thanks?
Juhi Pethe madam and Ritu Sharma. As usual, Ritu rocking. Juhi madam, it was a wonderful presentation. And I just want to mention here, am I audible to everybody? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. See, Ritu madam, as you said rightly, Nashik region is one of the favorite regions of mine also, because I used to do a lot of trekking, and this is supposed to be the toughest region for all trekking people. You must be aware of it, because it has got Kalsubai, Alang, Kulang and Malangad. We used to enjoy these things actually in our college days. But anyway, it was a wonderful presentation, and I thank you, Mr. Manoj from Stone Studio, for supporting our this series of presentations. From Isola, I thank you everybody to attend the session. Thank you very much.
Shruti, can you just tell us something about the upcoming event?
Yes, the story of Godavari is the central part. I guess without Godavari, one cannot really describe Nashik, and that's what our the next session is going to be about. So we are dedicating one entire session with 2 speakers on next Sunday about again the same 2 aspects of Godavari. One is the ecological perspective, and definitely through stories. So stories is something again we will continue with the theme. And I'm really hoping that all your other questions of how the river originates and how does this travel throughout its geography And then how do people relate to the entire thing is going to be really magical, I suppose. And we really hope that you all will have a great session in the next time. So that's all for the day, and we hope you to catch it up for the next module next Sunday. Yes, thank you.